Howdy, welcome to Many Aggies, One World, a show about the stories and the lessons of those who have journeyed around the world. I'm Maria Hernandez, here with Ellie O'Connell, and today we're going to be speaking with Michele Vick, instructional consultant at the Center for Teaching Excellence, English Language Proficiency. With many years teaching English abroad, she's had many experiences that have shaped not only her professional, but personal growth. Before we begin, we'd like to preface this by stating that both Ellie and I know Michele Vick as we are student workers at the CTEOP. Without further ado, let's get on to the episode. Howdy, welcome back to another episode of Many Aggies, One World. We're joined here with Michele Vick, instructional consultant for the English Language Proficiency Program at the Center of Teaching Excellence. My name is Maria Hernandez. I am a junior studying political science, and I am an incoming executive for the MSCLT Jordan Institute.
My name is Ellie O'Connell. I'm also a junior studying archaeology and history, and I am the marketing executive for MSCLT Jordan.
Well, hi Ellie and Maria. Thanks for having me today. My name is Michele Vick, as you said, and I am a consultant with the English Language Proficiency Program within the CTE, which means that I work with the international instructional staff or instructors here at Texas A&M. Most of that is with teaching assistants who are also graduate students here, but also international faculty as needed. And before that, I worked for about 18 years outside of the U.S., mostly in North Africa, but also in the Middle East. And I also worked here in the U.S. in the adult education sector.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing. So we'll jump into the questions. I'll start us off. So how do you believe your diverse educational background spanning from psychology to education has prepared you to address global issues and promote international awareness within your teaching or consulting roles?
So I think, first of all, from my psychology background, really having an understanding of Maslow's hierarchy of needs really helped, because especially when I was working outside of the U.S., kind of understanding that most people they need their basic needs for survival to be met first before, they're kind of working on up through the rest of the hierarchy. And so I think that gave me a sense of empathy and patience as I worked with students in the classroom overseas. I think through my time overseas and then later in my graduate studies in education, I really began to learn a lot about culturally sustaining pedagogy, and that's not just about making, say, your teaching or whatever you're doing in the classroom relevant to people from diverse cultures, but actually embracing and making what you're doing in the classroom dependent upon diversity and the different knowledge and experiences that students bring to the classroom. I think also there was definitely experiences I had overseas where I realized there were different ways of knowing and frameworks of knowledge than just what I grew up with and was taught in the classroom back in the U.S. as a child. And then later in my graduate education, getting a master's in education, we dove into that more and just realizing that, our Western post-Enlightenment ways of constructing knowledge isn't the corner on the market. There are other ways of knowing and learning, and I can bring opportunities to embrace that and explore that into the classroom, and it makes space for more learners, and it also enriches not only the classroom, but my own learning and my own understanding of the world. And then finally, really, and this dovetails with what I just said, recognizing that each learner brings a lived experience and brings different ways of framing how they view the world into the classroom. And there's a phrase in education theory called funds of knowledge, where each student comes with funds of knowledge that come from their lived experience and their cultural background. And if you can help uncover that and help students lean into that as they're learning whatever you're trying to teach, it enriches and empowers their own learning experience, but it also enriches the rest of the classroom. And so for a simple example might be finding different kinds of ways of offering case studies or word problems or whatever you're teaching that are built more on the lived experience and the cultural background of the students themselves than my own framework.
Second question we have is, what made you choose Arabic as your second language?
All right, so I actually grew up learning Spanish as my second language. I grew up in Texas and had a fairly limited worldview. As I was growing up, I wasn't very aware of other areas outside of the U.S. or cultures or languages other than Spanish and Central America and South America. So for me, that was the only choice in the small school system that I was in as well. But I also thought someday I want to live outside of the U.S. and the only thing in my mind was Central America or maybe Ecuador, somewhere in South America. So I focused on learning Spanish and had 13 semesters of it, so I should be better at it than I am. And don't ever try to test me on it. But I think once I got overseas, I lived in an Arabic-speaking country, so it was just natural. I learned through immersion and learned much more rapidly, and my speaking and listening skills in Arabic are much stronger than my Spanish skills, even though I had 13 semesters of Spanish.
So our next question is actually about what made you choose to go abroad to North Africa and the Middle East. So how did you go from, this small Texas town with a more limited worldview? How did you transition to living and working where you did?
Yeah, I think that is a fascinating part of my story.
If I were looking at someone else with a similar upbringing and lived experience to mine, I would really wonder, how did that happen? First of all, I will say that I was raised by parents who were, they were very open-minded, and they really trained my sister and I to be very adventurous. So we were constantly taking road trips all over the U.S. That they loved having new experiences. They loved exposing us to new experiences. We weren't very wealthy, and so it was road trips. I never got on an airplane until I was in college, and I didn't get a passport till I was 25 years old. But I learned a lot about what the U.S. had to offer in terms of the cultural diversities here, and I think those early experiences set me up for being very open-minded and wanting even more in terms of learning about other cultures, other places, other people. And then when I was in university, I had additional experiences that continued that. Some summer experiences as a camp counselor and some travel experiences in university. I still wasn't thinking about North Africa, though, at all. I was thinking I will try to find some sort of job, early on after graduation that will hopefully help me get overseas. I started right after college working in a children's home, and in that children's home is where I first had early experiences to Africa. A lot of my caseload was from East Africa, and many of them had passed through as refugees, the first country I lived in when I moved outside of the U.S. So that was early exposure, and I began to be interested in their culture and learning more about their experiences and the experiences of people who had lived in situations of war or crisis in East Africa. And then soon, also into that time of working as a caseworker, I found out about the country of Sudan just by chance, hearing something on the radio, and for some reason it just stuck with me. So this was, I'll age myself here, this was the early days of the internet, and I learned to use the internet so that I could learn about Sudan. I just became fascinated with the country, wanted to learn more about it. At the time, it was the largest country in Africa. It had over 249 active languages in one country, so extremely linguistically diverse, culturally diverse, situated right along the Nile, and I was just enamored with this country. So I got my first passport to go visit the country. I just decided I want to go see what it's really like there, and so I went on a trip and I fell in love with the country, and then I just spent several years trying to put myself into a position where I could actually move there and work there, and it all seems kind of bizarre, but I was a young, in my 20s, idealistic person who thought, this is what I want to do, I'm fascinated with this country, and I'm gonna make it happen. So I did.
Just a little question. How many years did you live in Sudan?
12.
12.
Yeah, so I was in my 20s when I moved there, and I was almost 40 when I left. It was.
By the time I left, I had lived over a third of my life there.
Mm-hmm. And where else did you like work or teach or live?
So after Sudan, I went to Jordan, and then Libya and Egypt. And Libya was the longest of those. I was there for almost 5 years.
Being an English teacher in the Middle East and North Africa, how would you say you tailored your teaching style to the diverse culture in those countries?
So when I was in Sudan, I think at first, this is the way I got hired. And this, I think, plays a lot into my story and is one of the reasons why I would even want to be interviewed by the Jordan Institute. I wasn't a trained teacher. I had a psychology background. I'd worked as a social worker. I thought that I would be working with street children in Sudan. And I got there, and there were various reasons why I realized working with street children isn't the best path for me, or for the organizations that I potentially would have worked with. And there was a university, and they asked me to teach. And I said, I'm not a trained teacher, and I don't think I should teach. And they said, no, but you're an American, and you've had an American education system, and we want you to just come and do whatever your teachers would have done with you in the classroom and influence. And I thought, okay. I now think I wish I had pushed back on that, because that sometimes is the problem. America is viewed as the best at everything, and most of the input is one directional from the US to Africa, instead of there being bi-directional, we all have something to learn from one another. But I did start teaching, and so in the beginning, that's what I did. I did what they asked. I tried to bring how I learned in the US and overlay that onto a classroom there. And I did a lot of things wrong. And for one thing, the university, they ran preschool all the way through PhD. They had all levels of education. And they put me at the high school at first. And the high school was co-ed, but the classes were separate. And the part of Sudan I was in was an Islamic culture and operating by Islamic principles. And so they didn't have genders mixed in the classroom. And I said, no, I want everybody together, and I want to level the classes. So I want a boys and girls class at English level 1, and then a boys and girls class at English level 2, and an English level 3. A very American way of doing things. That really blew up in my face in a lot of ways. It was just such an uncultural way of doing things. So for one thing, I mixed the classes gender-wise without any thought about how that might affect them in their culture. And for another thing, I leveled it, and that's a very Western and individualistic framework for the way instruction can be done. And what it took away was the communal learning, which is much more common in other cultures outside of our culture, where they help each other, and those who are a little bit stronger in an area, then they help those who are a little bit weaker in that area, and everybody benefits from that. And so I took that away, because I took all the strong people and put them in different groups and different levels. over time, I reverted back to the way that they had been doing things before I came and found other ways to teach that were more in line with their traditional ways of learning and that respected their culture and honored their culture. So those are big things that I learned. And then I also brought in like learning more about what's important to them. So at first, like teaching English was through stories and information that was kind of grounded or centered in the West, and instead I brought in stories and information that was grounded in their own culture. And then I started learning about their holidays and kind of brought that into the learning and started having them do presentations and presenting about people that were important to them and historical people and historical landmarks and historical events that were important to them, and using what was important to them to actually teach the English language. And then we could go on into even teaching English language and that being like the all-important language, but I'll stop there. So,
thank you. Our next question. In your role as Associate Director of the Distance Education Professional Development Center, how did you effectively manage a team to deliver high-quality training programs for educators across different regions?
Yeah, so that was a pretty big leadership role for me here in the U.S., and maybe my first leadership role in the U.S. because it was like my first big job after I moved back to the U.S.
And it was a challenging leadership role, and I had a team that was mixed between full-timers and part-timers, and I had student workers, and then I had some people who were in their 60s and all different levels of jobs. So I really love to develop people. It's one of, I think, my strengths, and I think I had to look for how do I leverage the strengths that I see that are really obvious and assign roles and tasks based on some of those strengths, but also how do I look for the hidden strengths, like things that with some development, maybe they're not even aware of it, but I can see the potential there and do some mentoring and some training and develop that and call that forth from them. So that was something that was a great joy for me. Like my admin assistant, I figured out she's actually a pretty decent presenter. And we were doing presentations and webinars and workshops all the time. And it wasn't really within her job description to do presentations, but she had the chops for it. She just hadn't been offered the opportunity. And so little by little, I started letting my admin assistant take on different roles within our workshops and presentations, knowing that maybe someday that's another job she can apply for and move into, which would be a really good move up a career ladder for her. The other thing I had to do was learn how to set expectations and set them very clearly, and then follow through and follow up on those, so that people know, like, if I do set this expectation, then I mean it. And so I'm not going to just like throw it out there and then not check up like the next day or a week or whatever the timeline is and follow through on it. Because if you set a lot of expectations but you don't follow through or follow up on them, then people stop thinking that you actually mean it when you set those. And so then going along with that is I learned a lot about giving feedback and giving feedback in a constructive way that builds on the strengths that I see, but also the places where I needed to see something different for the good of the team and the project. And then the last thing was just learning to exercise a lot of humility. Humility when I give feedback, but also humility when I mess up or when I communicate something and then realize I can't actually fulfill what I communicated, and modeling humility for the team. So those are some of the things that really helped me with that job.
So I know we talked about your educational background, but to kind of touch upon it a little bit more for the viewers and the audience. So your educational background includes a Master of Education focused on mind, brain, and education from Harvard Graduate School of Education. How has this program in particular influenced your perspective on international awareness?
Yeah, so my cohort, there were about 800 of us. It was the COVID year, so everything was online for the entire year, which is kind of a bummer that I didn't actually get to be there on campus. But we had, because it was all online, and because student visas didn't happen that year because it was offered online, it meant that my colleagues in my cohort were on Zoom with me from all over the world. And so that alone increased international awareness, because in any kind of small talk, we're talking about where we are in that moment, and you can see kind of in their background things that are different and culturally different. I think also because 25% or 30% of the cohort was international, everything had that flavor to it as we were in group discussions. I don't think in my entire master's degree I attended meaning online on Zoom, more than 5 or 6 lectures. That was not the format of my master's degree. It was all group work, you're in the main Zoom room for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then you're in breakout rooms and you're working together doing different activities. So always that international perspective was there because there were always a lot internationally with me. That's kind of the broad answer. And I think one of the things that I learned from listening to my colleagues from other countries is that sometimes they had differing values and differing goals than me, and it was really helpful to learn that maybe my value for what that master's meant was very different than their value. Maybe the pressure that they were facing was pretty different than the pressure I was facing. And my goals for what I wanted out of that education and what I was going to do in the future was often really different as well. And not different in a good or a bad way. It just was really eye-opening to see the differing values and goals and approach to graduate education internationally. And I think that that's also affected how I show up as a consultant here, working with international graduate students, but also how I've shown up as a teacher as I've worked between when I graduated with my master's degree and got this current job, how I worked with others in the classroom as well, with adult learners. I realized I've made a lot of assumptions about goals and values regarding education, and a lot of those are culturally conditioned or conditioned based on my family background, but I need to be asking more questions. Especially any adult learning should be goal-centered and goal-driven anyway, and so I've tried to make that a larger part of what I do as I engage learners, whether it's one-on-one clients in my current role or in the classroom, is learn more about their goals and why they're there. And then on the flip side of that is suspending judgment. I'm not there to judge their goals or their values or their ways of knowledge and their frameworks and ways of knowing, like we talked about earlier on. So there was a lot of learning to suspend judgment during that master's program, and just showing up and making space for others. And I think my cohort was really beautiful, and us all doing that together. It was a really lovely space. A couple of other things from that master's program or that graduate program. I did notice that in some of my cohort that were international students and English wasn't their first language, sometimes the rapid fire, I'm here to show my answer and what I know and stuff, did not benefit them. Mm-hmm. And so often we didn't get to benefit from what they knew and what they brought because we didn't make space for it. And so that was a big learning curve. And it was a place where I also had to learn, how much do I speak up because I'm seeing this, and I want, not just, I don't want to be the only one making space and slowing down and creating a space of silence where it gives time for someone who English isn't their first language for them to gather their thoughts and speak up, but I want my other English dominant colleagues to do the same thing. So that was an interesting dynamic to navigate, to try to figure out how do I speak up in a way that suggests humbly, hey, we could all pause a bit before we shout out our answers or our ideas in group discussions, and allow space for the English language for
the learners who English wasn't their dominant language to be able to participate more.
Thank you.
That's very interesting.
So speaking more about your previous roles, as a content developer for the Middle East Professional Learning Initiative, how did you ensure that the educational materials you created were culturally relevant and engaging for learners in that region?
Yeah, so my title for that job should be Content Development Coordinator, because I don't actually develop most of the content myself, because I want it to be culturally relevant and engaging for people in the region. So I work with a team
of educators from Jordan, Lebanon, and Palestine primarily, and we meet on Zoom pretty frequently. That's why I was late today, because we were meeting, and we work together to decide what is the content that people need in this moment, or to plan out like the next quarter, the content. And I really try to elicit from them what's going on in your region right now, what do people most need in terms of content about education. So, for example, we're about to do a conference on education and emergencies because there is a war going on in the region right now. And so we're putting together content for written content to complement the conference that's about to happen. I'm not writing that content, but I'm asking questions to try to draw out like what's most important and who needs to write it, and when do we need to get it done, and how do we also look ahead for like education post-emergency and coming back from tragedy and that kind of thing as far as the current content. But really working with them to develop those ideas, and then I proofread, edit, give feedback, stuff like that. And then we also look for images that are culturally relevant, that make sense. Sometimes they'll even turn into me an article that they want me to post on the website, and the photo is a blonde, blue-eyed kid, in a classroom, and I'll go back to them and say, hey, what if we found a different photo with an image that reflects more of the children that are in the classroom there. And so, that's kind of what it looks like.
Interesting. Thank you.
As an instructional consultant for the English Language Proficiency program that we have here on campus, what strategies have you found to be the most effective for teaching English as a second language?
I think giving feedback, and giving honest feedback that is couched in there are some things you do really well, but there are also some ways that you can improve, and I want to give you very specific and timely feedback on the things that you can do to improve, and I want to talk to you about how we can work with you on that. But I think that's something that we've gotten a lot of feedback back from the clients about, is that no one ever told them that they were mispronouncing, the sound consistently, or gave them such detailed feedback, and it actually was empowering for them because they knew people are struggling to understand them because they get asked to repeat themselves a lot, but they weren't 100% sure exactly where the problem was. And so targeted feedback is really important. And research actually showed, this is an area I've done a bit of research on, research actually shows that language instructors don't give students as much feedback as students want. So I think it's an area where language instructors, they don't want to discourage students, or they're just too busy, and so they don't give enough targeted feedback. But it's become an area over the last 5 to 7 years that I've been pretty committed to, is how do I give timely feedback to students. I think the other thing I brought to this job is the fact that I have had to learn another language in an immersion context. And then interestingly, we do work with a lot of students who have had a lot of English language instruction, and maybe English is even, if it's not, maybe not their first language, but they did all of K through 12 in English, like the language of instruction that they received their education in growing up was English. And then they get here and the English is so different and they get very discouraged, or they didn't score high enough on a test of spoken English proficiency, and it really discourages them because they think, I just spent 12 or 16 years of my education in English. How is it that I am scoring so low? And a lot of that is about dialect and accent. And having Arabic and having moved from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 Arabic speaking countries, I bring that to them and can say, it is a lot of work to switch dialects, but sometimes you have to if you want to be understood and if you want to fully engage in the new situation you found yourself in. And I spent 12 years learning one dialect. And then I went to another country, and that dialect was so different. It was as different as Portuguese and Spanish, or Spanish and Italian. So it was almost like learning a second language. And then I went to a third country and then a fourth country, and each time I had to switch. And I can empathize. It's hard and it's discouraging. But then you have to think about your goals. What do you want? And if your goal dictates that you're going to have to learn this new dialect, then you're just going to have to put in the work to do it. And that's just part of the process.
But I'm glad that I can bring that experience so that I do know what it's like for them, but I can also say it's doable.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that a lot of students want feedback or want more feedback than what instructors believe, because I'm sure there's a lot of students that are so eager to be fluent in English. So
yeah.
Interesting. Our final question about your experience in education. What experience do you have pioneering efforts to explore artificial intelligence in education?
Oh my goodness. Well,
so I would say I was an early adopter. I come from a very techie dad and a mom who's relatively technologically savvy considering her generation. My dad was sending me information about ChatGPT from the moment it was released in late 2021. So by February 2022, I had an account and I was using it almost every day. So as I have realized some of its potential for helping with certain processes, I've realized I want to really help others engage with it and learn how to use it. Especially at Texas A&M, I want to help address the fears that faculty have about it, and we are trying to do that through so many different initiatives with the Center for Teaching Excellence. But I also want to help faculty know strategies and ideas for introducing it in the classroom so that students learn how to use it ethically and responsibly. I think most students who are currently at A&M right this minute are going to need to know how to use it for their careers. And so I think we have to stay on top of it really fast and think through for each of the different industries that our students will be moving into as they graduate, what are the things that they're going to need to be able to do with AI, and especially with generative AI. I can't say I know a lot about the more technical aspects of AI, but generative AI is what I'm talking about. And so instead of saying absolutely you cannot use it at all in the classroom, and I as an instructor am also going to completely shy away from it, I think we have to stay on top of how do we prepare our students for a future where generative AI is going to be used in every industry. And so what does ethical, responsible use look like? And so I'm trying to stay on top of that myself. I'm helping CT develop different initiatives. I've helped them reframe their web page so that any instructor who's coming looking for help and information about generative AI and its use in the classroom finds the information that they're looking for really easily. We have an AI playground that's open for any faculty member to come to and just get their hands on the keyboard and practice using it in different ways. I'm looking at use cases of how faculty members are using it in the classroom. And then I've been involved in some early initiatives for training instructors in the Middle East as well through the Middle East Professional Learning Initiative. We did a series of webinars last summer about it, and I've helped put a lot of content on our webpage about it as well, just trying to make sure that people have knowledge about it and information, and it's constantly being updated.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I think it's good to spread awareness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's also fun to use.
It is really fun to use, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So now we're going to ask you some rapid fire questions.
Mm-hmm.
These have to be rapid fire.
Okay.
I'll start with the first one.
Okay,
It's pretty
hold on.
easy, I think. You ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Favorite artist?
Ooh. Okay, is this like music artist or?
Oh, yes. You can do both.
Oh, I don't listen to music.
Oh.
Oh my gosh, I can't skip, right?
No.
No. Okay. Music artist.
When you go on walks, what do you listen to? Do you,
I listen
in
to-
terms of
I listen to
Audiobooks.
audiobooks.
What's your favorite book that you've read recently or listened
Okay,
to?
so I'm really into Friedrich Bachmann right now, the
Change
Swedish
the
author. So we'll go
Okay.
with that.
Yeah,
so.
we'll use that. We'll use that.
Yeah.
Describe yourself in 3 words.
Enthusiastic, encourager. Oh, I know you said it has to be rapid. Adventurous.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yes.
I am not going to say that I came up with this question, but I'll ask it. Thoughts on Chili Fest?
Never been. My sister lives out there. So when I think about Chili Fest, I think traffic and my niece who works in College Station asking if she can spend the weekend with me so that she doesn't have to deal with the traffic going home.
Oh
Smart.
my gosh.
Okay, Texas or Massachusetts?
Texas.
Okay.
Okay. Cats or dogs?
I have one of each, but I am cats.
Okay. Favorite to win this past weekend's NCAA women's gymnastics competition?
Oh! I wanted Cal Berkeley to win because they have never won. LSU won and they had never won, and I was fine with that. I was fine with them winning.
Okay, they're both not on the same level, but Simone Biles or Lily Dunn?
Oh, Simone Biles.
Chill weekend or spontaneous weekend?
It depends on the week I've had, but
True.
I would go with spontaneous.
Okay.
Okay. Thoughts on Be Real?
I think it's cool. I like it.
Yeah.
I had never seen it before I took this job and had all my student workers using it, but as long as it really is people being real.
Okay. This is a food question. So,
Which would you rather have? Kazandibi, which is a Turkish pastry, or gulak, which is also another Turkish pastry?
I'm going to go with gulak.
Why is it?
Because I can kind of picture that one, but the other one I couldn't recognize. So,
Okay, fun fact about you. Just
any fun fact about me?
can you
I
do a headstand?
I have had over 100 stitches in my head, so
Oh, wow.
I will never get a buzz cut.
What were those stitches from?
It's a good thing I'm not a male in the core.
Oh, yeah.
I was mauled by a dog, and so that was over 80 stitches. I don't remember it. I was really small.
Okay.
And then I cut my head open 6
additional times.
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It's okay though.
You're thriving.
I am thriving.
Now we're thriving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else you feel like you want to talk about?
You know, one of the things I'd like to circle back around to language.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote down a few notes. I was thinking, I really think that it is so important to take every opportunity to try to learn a language when you're in a country. I watched, in all of those countries I lived in, I watched expats not choosing to learn the language. And, we all had jobs. Like, it was really busy and it took a lot of effort and commitment. But first of all, just from purely selfish standpoint, the ones who learned the language, or at least attempted to, seemed to thrive more.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they really grew more comfortable and didn't feel like so foreign and on the outside all the time, and didn't seem as suspicious of local culture and local interactions, because they could understand what was going on around them. And so there's this place of thriving, but also culture is so embedded in the language that I really think, like, if you really want to learn and understand a culture, you have to take time to actually learn the language. And I'll give one fun example. So one of the countries I lived in had gone through so much war and disruption for so many decades that there wasn't a really good sense of like what's going to happen next year or even next week at times. It was also ranked like in the top 20 poorest countries in the world, which can also affect a sense of future and make future really uncertain. Also, in the Islamic culture, there's this place of humility about the future, and inshallah, which means like if God wills, is a big part of like anything that you say about the future. So that was layered on top of everything that was going on. So what was really interesting is in this country, the language did not use a future tense. So there, you just didn't, like, there is a future tense in Arabic, or a future aspect.
But you didn't ever use it in this one country because embedded into their language is the fact that we don't know what next week holds, or a month from now, or a year from now. And I probably wouldn't have understood the deep sense of that if I hadn't taken time to learn the language. And there's just so much embedded in the culture. But also, like, language learning takes humility, and you put yourself in the seat of a learner. And
as Westerners, we can easily go into countries because we're raised with so much confidence and pride about our country and a lot of things. We can easily go into another culture and take that there and kind of be cocky or arrogant. But you put yourself into a position of dependence and humility when you're taking time to learn the language. So that can really help. It also shows value of the people in the culture, and it helps you just kind of take a back seat and not always be the leader or the first one to say something. And I think there's also value in taking a back seat and being willing to like let other people lead out at times and learn from them before you start offering your own perspective or opinions and stuff. So I am team language learning.
Well, that's all the questions that we had.
It was lovely to have you.
Yes, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
taking the time out of your day to come and speak with us. But yeah, I think that wraps it up.
thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to our latest episode of Many Aggies One World. We really enjoyed hearing about Michelle's experiences with education and language learning. Keep an eye on our social media at MSCLT to continue following our podcast. Thanks so much again for tuning in and listening to our episode. Once again, please make sure to follow us on our socials so you can stay up to date with what we're doing. You can find us on Instagram at MSCLT, and that's all we have for you today. Thanks and gig 'em.